Alright YouTube, so we're back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and relatively recently, it's been a few weeks at this point, we learned that Final Fantasy XVI's not gonna be open world. Which, first of all, is great news, because I'm not the biggest fan of Final Fantasy XV. I did play it to completion, but its open world was very, very lackluster. But without confirmation from the devs, it's kind of hard to know exactly what 16 was gonna be, simply because, like, after we got that last trailer, we're getting, like, in-game screenshots and shit. And some of the stuff looked like it could potentially be open world, kind of like this. Like, without knowing at all what 16 is going to be, if you just looked at this screenshot from, I think, in-game, you would potentially think that it is going to be open world, because this looks like a pretty goddamn big area to explore. But having that confirmation from Yoshida that it's just going to be essentially big zones to explore, with, like, load screens between or whatever the case, like, that's fantastic. So this obviously got people within the FF7 community talking and discussing what they could potentially be doing with Rebirth, which I think is a fair discussion, because even if they're different, like, developing studios and shit like that, different divisions under the Square Enix umbrella, like, there's going to be some overlap. We know the devs talk and discuss shit with each other, but it's probably like an overall vision I would think that Square Enix kind of has, and they already attempted open world once with 15, and again, it wasn't very well received. Now, to be fair, 15 was trying to use the Luminous engine, which at the time is pretty new. They're trying to create their own game engine, and then we got this tech demo, which was that crazy trailer we got some years ago, and then eventually 15 was made and released, and they were trying to come out with something called Witch Chapter 0, which is something I've never heard of. A lot of stuff I'm learning today while making this video, and then I just found out while making this video that they're going to be using the Luminous engine for Forspoken, which, take from that what you will. So 15 using a brand new engine at the time could have been a cause for why maybe its open world just wasn't that good. Maybe they were still learning the damn engine. They just didn't know what to do with it. Didn't really know how to create open world. Whatever the case, right? The point of bringing all this up is that going forward after 15, they still could have tried the open world route with one of their games, just with Unreal Engine 4/5, right? Like, they could have went that route with a better, more optimized engine. Now we know 16 is not doing that. I would assume also when it comes to Remake Part 2 or Rebirth, same thing. I don't think they're going to go open world. And we're not really going to get open world anyways until we really have either the Tiny Bronco /submarine or the airship. That's when, FF7 really could be considered sort of an open world game. Some people seem to forget sometimes is that, FF7 was a pretty linear game, much like Remake Part 1. Like, when it comes to exploring the world, there's a couple locations you can skip over, like Chocobo Farm, also Fort Condor, and once you get past, like, Gold Saucer and you're going towards Cosmo Canyon, you don't have to go to Gongaga, but at certain points in the story later on, you're going to be forced to go to some of those locations. But the point is, when it comes to FF7 Original, you're forced to just go forward the entire time. It's a pretty linear game. So why people would want an open world when it comes to, like, Part 2 and beyond, it's kind of weird, because that's not even what the OG FF7 was. And there's only so much you can do anyways, because even if the game was open world, so to speak, you couldn't just walk from, like, outside of Calm with, like, Chapter 2, presumably, Chapter 1, Chapter 2 of Rebirth. You couldn't just walk from outside of Calm straight to Junon and skip over everything, right? They're going to make you stop at certain locations, make you stop at certain points to progress the story. I believe more so what it is that people want is an overworld map. That's what we've been kind of missing for the Final Fantasy games for quite some time, is just they want to walk from location to location. People didn't want to be in Calm for the Calm flashback and whatever story might take place there. Then a load screen and our group's already at, like, Chocobo Farm or already at Mithril Mine or whatever the case. Like, people wanted to walk from Calm to Chocobo Farm, from Chocobo Farm to Mithril Mine. Like, that's what we want. We want the freedom to just walk and control our characters, so it feels like you're actually traversing the world. Which I think is a fair request from, like, the fans and the community, right? Because you're remaking Final Fantasy VII. Like, you come to expect it. That's what the original game had. If we were having load screens between locations, that'd be completely fucking awful. Especially coming off of the back of Remake Part 1, which was a relatively linear game. It's a great game. It's a fun game, but the fact is it's linear, right? There's no freedom to really do a whole lot in that game. So it comes to be expected that once we leave the confinement of Midgar, which is this, like, crazy metropolis within the world of Gaia, that people would come to expect that we'd have the freedom to explore to some degree. It doesn't need to be a massive open world map, right? Calm to Mithril Mine doesn't need to be the biggest open world you've ever seen. Like, it's not that much there. Outside of Calm, it's just the Chocobo Farm, and then you're at Mithril Mine. They could maybe turn the Zalm Swamp into its own location, which I'd be perfectly fine with that, of course. I would love for him to have his own, like, set piece and then a boss fight at the end. The same can kind of be said for pretty much every area you go to in FF7. Like, once you leave the Mithril Mine, it's just Fort Condor and Junon, right? There's the old man's house across the river, but you need the buggy to get there. Once you get across the river to Costa del Sol, once you leave the town of Costa del Sol, there's not anything to do. Like, you have to go to Mount Corel. And once you get to Mount Corel, you go to the town of North Corel. You can leave the town of North Corel. There's not a whole lot to do around the desert around Gold Saucer, right? So then you're forced to go back into the town and head straight to Gold Saucer. So again, there's not really any freedom in the original FF7 anyways for a long period of time, up until you get to Highwind, really. So actually, when it comes to the remake trilogy as we know it now to be, like, I don't expect there to be anything that we could even really consider open world until the third part, until the last game. Because a lot of us, or a lot of people rather, I'm still on the fence about it, think that, part 2 is going to end at North Crater, right? And you don't get the Highwind until after that. So it makes sense that the third game would open up, you have the more freedom to explore the entire world. Pretty much the entire world's mapped out. If we go as far as North Crater, and you have the freedom to actually fly around with the Highwind. Now, would it be traditional open world where you can just go anywhere you want to and do whatever you want? I don't know, because they've got to tell a story with Part 3. I don't know how they'd handle it. Or would it be like what we've seen from more recent Final Fantasy games for a long time now, actually like 20 plus years, since like Final Fantasy X, where you get into your airship and you just pick where you got to go and you load into that area. Like, that might be what they do with Part 3. I hope that's not the case, but I don't know how they're going to handle it, because they got to make you go to certain locations to continue the story, right? Something they could potentially do is, like, once you get the airship and have the freedom to kind of explore, they could have characters tell you that, hey, we need to look for Cloud. Where's Cloud Strife at? And maybe, like, their dialogue points you in the direction of Mideel. You have that kind of general area you need to go to, but maybe you have full control of the airship and you can just kind of fly around and do whatever you want. Ultimately, when it comes to this discussion, I do think that what they're doing with 16 can be somewhat indicative of what they're going to be doing with Rebirth. Now, again, as we just discussed, the third part, it's kind of hard to say what they're going to do. But I do think that the second one, as we've been saying for a long time, is just going to be big zones to explore, which is what we want anyways. I'm kind of curious, too, kind of a little off topics, but sort of on topic. Once we leave Calm and we have the freedom to kind of explore, can we turn around and walk back towards Midgar and walk through that gigantic wasteland that we seem to have now skipped? Look, my dudes, this is a conversation we've had quite a bit over the last 2+ years now, maybe even like 3 years. We might have been talking about this back in 2019, I'm not entirely sure. But I think with the confirmation of what they're doing with Final Fantasy XVI, even though, again, it's a completely different studio, can, in a roundabout way, tell us what they're probably going to be doing with Part 2. But my dudes, that is pretty much going to be the video, so of course, pass off to you guys. I know the 16 information came out like 2+ weeks ago at this point, but we've been super busy just talking about FF7 stuff. That's always going to be the focus of the channel. Because even now, we're talking about 16 information, but we're having a discussion in regards to FF7. It's always going to be the focus. But with the confirmation of what 16 is going to be, not an open world game, essentially big zones to explore, how do you think they're going to handle Part 2? Or Rebirth? My dudes, that's the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys aren't interested in more Final Fantasy VII Rebirth content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter, #YT. I'm a Discord. Links to social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.